There is a compound hiding inside a food you were probably told to permanently remove from your life the day you were diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. That compound has been studied in peer-reviewed clinical trials at some of the most respected institutions in the world. It has been shown to improve insulin sensitivity, reduce fasting blood glucose, and this is the part that stopped me cold the first time I read it. Activate the same metabolic pathway that the diabetes drug Metformin targets. The food is chocolate. Not all of it, not the kind lining the checkout counters at the pharmacy, but a specific family of chocolate products that most people with type 2 diabetes have been avoiding out of fear. And that fear has quietly cost them a tool that could have been working in their favor every single morning. Today, I'm going to walk you through 5 specific types of chocolate that the clinical evidence supports for people managing blood sugar. I'm going to tell you exactly what to look for on every label, what to avoid, and how to bring each one into your daily life starting tonight. And stay with me to number 4, because the one most people overlook as too bitter to bother with has published data showing a blood glucose reduction that rivals some pharmaceutical interventions. Most people scroll right past it in the grocery aisle. But before I name a single one, I have to show you the mechanism that makes this entire conversation possible. Because without understanding it, the 5 types I'm about to share will just sound like a list. Once you understand it, you won't need me to convince you. The science will do that on its own. Before I go on, drop a comment right now. Tell me how old you are and what your most recent A1C number was. You don't have to give your name, just a number and an age. I read every single comment and I use those answers to decide exactly what this channel covers next. If I see a cluster of people at 7.2 or 7.5, I know where to go next week. Your comment matters more than you think. Here's the distinction that changes everything, and almost no mainstream health article takes the time to make it clearly. When we talk about chocolate and blood sugar, we are not actually talking about chocolate. We are talking about cacao, the raw material that chocolate comes from. These are 2 entirely different things, and the line between them is drawn by how much processing a product has been through. Inside the raw cacao bean lives a family of plant compounds called polyphenols. The 2 most clinically significant for people with type 2 diabetes are epicin and catechin. And I want to explain what these compounds actually do at the cellular level, because this is not abstract nutrition science. This is molecular biology that connects directly to the disease you are managing. The first mechanism is AMK activation. AMPK, adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase, is an enzyme your cells use as an energy sensor. When it's activated, it tells your muscle cells to take up glucose from the blood independently of insulin. It essentially opens a side door into your cells when the main door, the insulin receptor, is malfunctioning. This is the same pathway that metformin, one of the most widely prescribed diabetes drugs in the world, works on. Epicin from cacao has been shown in cellular research to activate this same pathway. The second mechanism is endothelial repair. The lining of your blood vessels, called the endothelium, is where insulin signaling begins. In type 2 diabetes, chronic inflammation and oxidative stress damage this lining, and that damage is part of why insulin resistance progresses over time. Cacao flavonoids have demonstrated the ability to improve endothelial function measured by a test called flow-mediated dilation in multiple randomized controlled trials. The third mechanism is the one I want you to hold on to most carefully: gut microbiome modulation. This connection was barely discussed a decade ago. We now know that cacao polyphenols selectively feed beneficial gut bacteria, specifically lactobacillus and bifidobacterium strains that produce short-chain fatty acids. Those fatty acids directly influence insulin sensitivity and reduce the inflammatory signaling that keeps type 2 diabetes progressing forward. These 3 mechanisms working together explain why the clinical results are real and why they show up across multiple independent trials on multiple continents. This is not folk medicine. This is biology. Now, here is the critical point. Every step of industrial chocolate manufacturing, roasting, alkalization, coning, pressing, degrades these polyphenols. The more processed a chocolate product is, the fewer of these compounds survive to the moment you eat it. So, what I'm about to rank is not chocolate by flavor or popularity. I'm ranking it by polyphenol preservation and the strength of the clinical evidence behind each form. Type 1, dark chocolate, 70% cacao. I'm starting here because this is where most of my patients can realistically begin without feeling like I've handed them a punishment. 70% dark chocolate has a glycemic index of approximately 23. Whole wheat bread sits at 69. Table sugar at 65. A standard commercial milk chocolate bar often clears 50 or above. At 23, the glucose response from a 20-gram portion of quality 70% dark chocolate is genuinely modest. Not because I'm rounding optimistically, but because the combination of cacao fat and cacao fiber physically slows the absorption of whatever sugar is present in the bar. The fat delays gastric emptying. The fiber slows diffusion across the intestinal wall. Your bloodstream simply never sees a flood. I want to tell you about Harold. He came to my office at 72, a retired school principal with a pre-diabetes diagnosis from 6 months prior and an A1C that had climbed from 5.8 to 6.2 in 1 year. Harold had a lifelong evening ritual: 1 or 2 pieces of chocolate at 8 p.m. after the news. When he was diagnosed, he stopped completely, immediately, and replaced it with nothing. He felt proud of his discipline. His A1C at the next visit was 6.3. The ritual was gone, but a different behavior had replaced it. He was reaching for crackers, popcorn, and dried fruit by 900 p.m. because something was still missing at 8. I didn't tell Harold to reintroduce chocolate. I told him to reintroduce the ritual with the right chocolate. 2 squares of 70% dark chocolate alongside a small handful of walnuts after dinner. 3 months later, his A1C was 5.9. The science that supports this is not anecdotal. A 2022 meta-analysis published in the International Journal of Food Sciences and Nutrition, examining data across 12 randomized controlled trials in type 2 diabetes patients, found that cocoa product consumption was associated with significant reductions in fasting blood glucose, LDL cholesterol, and C-reactive protein. A clinically supported portion is about 20 to 30 grams per day, which is 2 or 3 small squares. Now, here's the label trap. Many bars sold as dark chocolate or 70% cacao actually list sugar as the first ingredient on the back. The front of the package is marketing. The ingredient list is the truth. Flip the bar over. Cacao mass or cacao paste must be the first word on that list. If sugar comes first, the bar is not what the front claims, no matter how dark it looks. Type 2, dark chocolate, 85% cacao and above. This is where the clinical evidence makes a significant jump, and I want to be precise about why. As cacao percentage climbs from 70% to 85%, 2 things happen simultaneously. The flavonoid concentration rises by roughly 30 to 40% per gram, and the sugar content drops from approximately 20 to 25 grams per 100 gram bar down to 10 to 14 grams. You are getting significantly more of the therapeutic compounds and significantly less of the problem in the same portion. A randomized clinical trial published in the International Journal of Preventive Medicine studied 84% dark chocolate in adults with type 2 diabetes over 8 weeks. The group consuming 30 grams of 84% cacao daily saw statistically significant reductions in fasting blood glucose, hemoglobin A1C, LDL cholesterol, and triglycerides, along with meaningful reductions in C-reactive protein, TNF-alpha, and IL-6, 3 of the primary inflammatory markers that drive insulin resistance forward year after year. I want to draw your attention to those inflammatory findings specifically. C-reactive protein, TNF-alpha, and IL-6 are not just markers we watch, they are part of the mechanism by which chronic low-grade inflammation prevents your insulin receptors from functioning correctly. When these markers come down, insulin sensitivity tends to follow. You are not just treating a symptom, you are quieting one of the drivers of the disease itself. A practical advantage of 85% that I have watched play out in my patients again and again. The intensity of the flavor creates natural portion control. The bar asks you to slow down. 1 or 2 squares register as satisfying in a way that a sweeter, milder chocolate never does. I've watched people who struggled their entire adult lives to moderate chocolate suddenly find 20 grams effortless at 85%. Not because they became more disciplined, but because the chocolate itself signaled completion sooner. The label trap for 85%. At this percentage, some manufacturers compensate for the bitterness by adding vanilla, a synthetic vanilla compound, or by using heavily Dutch processed cacao that has been chemically treated with alkali to reduce bitterness. Dutch processing destroys flavonoids. Look for the words natural processed or non-alkalized on the label. If you see processed with alkali in the ingredient list, those polyphenols have been significantly degraded before you open the package. I want to pause here and ask you something directly. Of the first 2 types I've covered, the 70% and the 85%, which one do you think you could realistically bring into your routine this week? Leave your answer in the comments, and while you're there, tell me, has any physician ever explained to you how inflammation specifically drives insulin resistance over time? In 20 years of clinical practice, the answer I hear most often surprises me. I'll tell you what it is at the end of this video. Type 3. Cacao Nibs. This is the one most people in the grocery store walk past without a second look. And I understand why. They look like gravel. They taste nothing like the chocolate you grew up with. And there is no clever marketing on the bag trying to convince you they're a treat. But from a clinical standpoint, cacao nibs are the most flavonoid-dense, solid form of cacao you can put in your mouth. Here is why. A chocolate bar requires the cacao bean to be pressed, conched, tempered, and molded. Each of those industrial steps degrades a portion of the polyphenol content. Cacao nibs skip almost all of it. They are simply the roasted cacao bean cracked open and crushed. What survives that minimal process is close to what the bean contained before any human intervention. The glycemic index of cacao nibs is effectively 0. There is no added sugar, there is no milk, there is no filler. What you are eating is cacao fiber, cacao fat, and a dense concentration of epicin and catechin. For someone managing blood sugar, that profile is as safe as a solid chocolate product gets. Now, I am going to be honest with you the way I would sitting across from you in a consultation room. I do not tell my patients to eat cacao nibs as a snack. The bitterness is too sharp for most people, and I have no interest in handing you a recommendation you will use once and abandon. I tell my patients to use them as a tool woven invisibly into foods they already enjoy. A teaspoon of cacao nibs stirred into full-fat plain Greek yogurt. A small handful blended into your morning oatmeal before it cooks. A tablespoon folded into a homemade trail mix with unsalted almonds and pumpkin seeds. In these contexts, you barely taste the bitterness. You taste texture, depth, and a faint chocolate note. And your blood sugar curve barely notices they were there. I want to tell you about Dorothy. She came to me at 67, 12 years into type 2 diabetes. A 1C sitting at 7.1. She had given up every form of chocolate years before and felt no emotional connection to the restriction anymore. She just accepted it. But her fasting glucose numbers had plateaued for 3 years despite consistent medication. We talked about cacao nibs specifically. She started with a teaspoon in her morning yogurt, just that one change. After 5 months, her fasting glucose had dropped by an average of 11 points. Her A1C at the next lab draw was 6.7. The label trap for cacao nibs. The ingredient list should have exactly one item. Cacao nibs, or roasted cacao beans. That is it. Some products blend in cane sugar or coconut sugar and still call themselves natural cacao nibs. The word natural means nothing legally. The ingredient list means everything. If you're still watching and this helps, type number 3 in the comments. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and the bell so you don't miss any future videos. Type 4. Sugar-free chocolate sweetened with erythritol or monk fruit. I want to handle this section carefully because the sugar-free chocolate category is one of the most aggressively marketed and most frequently misrepresented spaces in the diabetic food market. First, the compounds that actually work is a sugar alcohol with a glycemic index of essentially 0. Unlike most sugar alcohols, it is absorbed almost entirely in the small intestine and excreted unchanged through the kidneys, which means it bypasses the large intestine and causes almost none of the digestive discomfort the bloating, cramping, and urgency associated with other sugar alcohols. It carries about 70% of the sweetness of sugar with negligible metabolic consequence. Monk fruit extract, also called Luhan Guo, works through a completely different pathway. The sweet compounds in monk fruit magrades are not metabolized by the human body at all. They pass through the digestive tract without triggering insulin or raising glucose. A 2019 review in the journal Nutrients confirmed no significant glycemic response from monk fruit sweeteners across the studies examined. A chocolate bar sweetened with erythritol or monk fruit built on a base of 60% or higher cacao gives you flavonoid delivery in a format that tastes genuinely close to the milk chocolate many of my patients spent decades enjoying. A word I need to say clearly before we go further, particularly for those of you managing both diabetes and cardiovascular risk. Erythritol has a well-established zero glycemic index, and for blood sugar management, that evidence is solid. However, I want to be transparent with you about emerging research you deserve to know. A 2023 study published in the journal Nature Medicine, conducted by researchers at the Cleveland Clinic across more than 4,000 patients in both the United States and Europe, found that people with higher blood levels of erythritol had a significantly increased risk of major cardiovascular events, including heart attack and stroke. Follow-up laboratory research showed that erythritol increased the tendency of platelets to clump together and form clots. A second prospective study from the same team in 2024 confirmed this finding in healthy volunteers given a standard erythritol dose. This research is still evolving and does not yet prove direct cause and effect. Some researchers have noted that people with metabolic disease naturally produce more erythritol internally, meaning higher blood levels may partly reflect existing disease rather than dietary intake alone. The FDA continues to consider erythritol safe, but here is why I am raising it with you specifically. Many of you watching this are seniors with type 2 diabetes, a population that already carries elevated cardiovascular risk. You are precisely the group these researchers were most concerned about. The science on erythritol's blood sugar effect is strong. The science on its long-term cardiovascular safety in high-risk individuals is still being written. My clinical recommendation, if you are managing cardiovascular risk alongside diabetes, and most of my patients over 65 are, consider making monk fruit extract your primary sweetener in this category rather than erythritol. Monk fruit has no comparable cardiovascular concerns in the current literature, delivers the same zero glycemic profile, and gives you everything you need from a blood sugar standpoint without the open question mark. Before making erythritol a daily part of your routine, raise it at your next appointment and ask your physician where the evidence currently stands. Now, the warning that applies to this entire category, regardless of which sweetener you choose, and this is the part I need you to remember. The majority of sugar-free chocolates on the shelf in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom are not sweetened with erythritol or monk fruit. They are sweetened with maltitol. Maltitol has a glycemic index of 52. That is not a safe number for someone managing blood sugar. At a 2-square portion, it may not cause a dramatic spike, but it is not inert. And many people eat more than 2 squares when the front label says sugar-free and their guard is down. On top of that, maltitol in adults over 60 frequently causes significant gastrointestinal distress because, unlike erythritol, it reaches the large intestine largely unabsorbed and ferments. I've had patients call me in genuine distress after a diabetic-friendly chocolate bar from a well-known brand sent them to the bathroom within the hour. The front label was full of promises. The back label had melt listed as the primary sweetener. Your 202 label rule for this category: flip the bar over. Go straight to the sweetener section of the ingredient list. You want to see erythritol, monk fruit extract, or stevia glycosides clearly written. If you see maltitol, isomalt, sorbitol, or the vague phrase sugar alcohol without naming the specific alcohol, put it back. The front of the package cannot be trusted in this category. The back is the only truth. Type 5, pure unsweetened cacao powder. I told you at the beginning to pay attention to number 5. Here it is. A container of pure, natural, non-alkalized cacao powder costs less than most single chocolate bars on the specialty shelf. It sits quietly on the baking aisle, overlooked by most shoppers, and it carries the most robust clinical evidence of all 5 types I've discussed today by a meaningful distance. A 2022 systematic review and meta-analysis published in the International Journal of Food Sciences and Nutrition, drawing from 12 randomized controlled trials involving people with type 2 diabetes, found that cocoa product supplementation produced statistically significant reductions in fasting blood glucose, LDL cholesterol, triglycerides, and C-reactive protein. The blood glucose reduction across pooled trial data was approximately 9 milligrams per deciliter, a consistent, durable finding across both short-term and long-term studies. I need you to understand what durable blood glucose reduction actually means in practice. Fasting blood glucose is not a snapshot taken on a lucky morning. It reflects how your body handles glucose in a resting baseline state. When a dietary intervention moves that marker consistently across 12 independent trials, you are looking at a structural change in how your metabolism is operating, not a short-lived effect. Why does pure cacao powder outperform even quality dark chocolate bars? Because every step of bar manufacturing, pressing, tempering, conching, exposes the flavonoids to heat and oxygen, which degrades them. Natural cacao powder skips most of that processing. The flavonoid content arrives in your body closer to what the original cacao bean contained. There is one critical distinction you must make when buying cacao powder: natural process versus Dutch process. Dutch processed cacao, also called alkalized cocoa, has been treated with an alkalizing agent to reduce acidity and bitterness. Research published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry found that heavy Dutch processing retains as little as 10% of the original flavonol content, a loss of up to 90%. That treatment produces a smoother, milder flavor. It also produces a product with almost none of the therapeutic polyphenols you are trying to consume. Natural processed cacao powder retains the full flavonoid profile. It is slightly more acidic and slightly more bitter. That is the trade-off. And for someone managing blood sugar, it is absolutely the correct trade-off to make. I want to tell you about James. He came to me at 76, skeptical of everything. Retired engineer, 8 years into type 2 diabetes, a 1C of 7.4 on 2 medications. He told me plainly he wasn't interested in health fads. So I didn't pitch it as a health fad. I told him there were 12 controlled trials and a published meta-analysis. He was interested in that. He started adding 1 teaspoon of natural cacao powder to his morning coffee with a small amount of cinnamon and unsweetened almond milk. Nothing else changed. 6 months later, his A1C was 6.9. He came back and said, "I want to see those 12 studies. Your label rule for cacao powder. The ingredient list must contain exactly 1 item: cocoa powder or cacao powder. Nothing else. Not natural flavors, not soy lecithin, not cane syrup. 1 ingredient and the words Dutch processed or processed with alkali anywhere on the label are your signal to put it back and find a different brand." If you're still watching and this helps, type number 5 in the comments. And if you haven't liked yet, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. Before I close, I want to address something that almost never comes up in a clinical conversation about food and diabetes, and I think it may be the most important thing I say in this entire video. There is a well-documented phenomenon in nutritional behavior research, sometimes called the "what the hell" effect. It describes what happens after a person with a strict, self-imposed food rule accidentally breaks that rule. Instead of stopping, they go further. The restriction collapses. The forbidden food gets consumed in a quantity that would never have happened if the rule hadn't existed in the first place. For someone with type 2 diabetes, this cycle has a physiological cost, not just a psychological one. The cortisol that rises during the guilt and cortisol does rise that is not metaphor, that is measurable, directly raises blood glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis, where your liver releases stored glucose in response to a stress signal. You can eat the exact same piece of chocolate, feel guilty about it, and have a worse blood sugar outcome than the person who ate the same piece without guilt. That is not philosophy. That is biochemistry. The patients I have watched achieve sustainable blood sugar management over years, not months, years, are not the ones with the strictest rules. They are the ones who build planned, informed, portion-uncontrolled inclusion of the foods they actually want into a daily structure they can maintain across decades. You now know enough to do exactly that with chocolate. You know why it works. You know which forms to choose. You know what to look for on a label. That knowledge transforms the experience, and the transformed experience produces better outcomes than willpower ever will. Let me bring this back to where we started. 5 types. Here is what the evidence supports. 70% dark chocolate. Your doorway in, a glycemic index of 23. Clinically documented flavonoid delivery and widely available in any grocery store. 85% dark chocolate and above, where the evidence shifts from blood sugar to inflammation. Reduced CRPT NF-alpha and IL-6. Natural portion control built into the flavor itself. Cacao Nibs, the highest flavonoid density in solid form, not a snack, an ingredient. 1 teaspoon in yogurt or oatmeal. Sugar-free chocolate with monk fruit extract or erythritol, the closest thing to the milk chocolate you remember with essentially no glycemic consequence. If you are managing cardiovascular risk alongside diabetes, prioritize monk fruit. Read the sweetener line. Avoid maltitol without exception and pure, unsweetened, natural cacao powder. The cheapest product in this entire conversation, and the one with the strongest published evidence on fasting blood glucose and inflammatory markers across 12 clinical trials. Here's what I want you to do this week. Go to the baking aisle the next time you're at the grocery store and look for natural cacao powder. Take a moment to turn the package over and read the ingredient list carefully. The only ingredient you want to see is 100% natural cacao powder, nothing else. No added sugar, no artificial flavors, no creamers, and no unnecessary fillers. A single ingredient is the simplest way to know you're getting the product discussed in the research. Once you bring it home, incorporating it into your daily routine is incredibly easy. Measure out 1 level tablespoon and stir it into your morning coffee. Mix it into a bowl of plain yogurt, or blend it into your oatmeal at breakfast. Choose whichever option fits naturally into your routine, because consistency matters far more than finding the perfect recipe. For the first week, pay close attention to how your body responds. If you already monitor your blood sugar at home, check your glucose approximately 2 hours after breakfast each day. Don't focus on a single reading. Instead, look for patterns over several days. Your own body's response provides information that no headline, advertisement, or social media post can replace. Individual results will always matter more than generalized claims. Then, at your next medical appointment, bring this topic up with your physician. You don't need a complicated discussion or medical jargon. Simply ask, based on my current A1C, my blood sugar levels, and the medications I'm taking, is there any reason I shouldn't add 1 tablespoon of natural cacao powder to my daily routine? That's a practical, informed question your healthcare provider can answer based on your personal medical history. Having that conversation allows you to make a decision that's supported by both scientific evidence and your individual health needs. The goal isn't to replace healthy eating, regular physical activity, or prescribed medications. It's to explore whether one simple, affordable addition could become another useful tool in your overall blood sugar management plan. Before you leave, I'd love to hear from you. Out of the 5 different types we discussed today, which one surprised you the most? And more importantly, which one are you planning to try first? Share your answer in the comments below. I genuinely read through your responses, and your experiences and questions play a big role in shaping the topics I cover in future videos. Your feedback helps make this channel more useful for everyone watching.